Why is rights-based family planning so important? Because women and girls are a powerful force for development. Unlocking that potential improves health, helps break the cycle of poverty and grow local and national economies, and can mitigate climate change. Each woman has value. Each girl holds the future in her hands. We are here because of her. By focusing on one, we can reach millions. What are the best ways to provide quality services for those who are the hardest to reach? And where is the FP 2020 partnership having the largest impact? Join us as we examine the people, partners, and programs that are bending the curve for FP 2020 progress. Together, the family planning community is changing the world.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning for FP 2020's Partnership Plenary. It's an honor and just such a happy moment to be here with all of you. Today, we're hoping to share the story with you over the next 90 minutes that we feel is our collective story. It's a story of people, programs, and partners. And working together, this is the way that we believe that we'll make progress. It's a story of how we're catalyzing this family planning movement. We're catalyzing collaboration because we want a world in which every woman and girl can realize her own rights to decide whether, when, if, or how many children to have. We're going to start today by looking at different aspects of family planning programs. Some that are new and innovative, some that are tried and true and are at the core and the heart of family planning programs. We're going to look at postpartum and post-abortion family planning. We're going to understand a little more about the importance of family planning in crisis and humanitarian settings. We're going to hear from youth colleagues who are energizing and pushing us forward and demanding the seat at the table and that we build with them for the programs they need and want. And we're going to hear, as always, from our civil society partners that are shaping the world for all of us, and again, along with youth, building the world that we want. And so we're going to share these by starting with some videos. And these are videos that are made by our partners from the field. And we think they tell the story from the woman's perspective of how all of this looks and feels within their own individual lives. After that, we'll hear from commitment makers themselves and from many of our reference group members, both past and present, who are going to tell their story of their political will, their commitment, and their passion that's driving forward through this FP 2020 partnership. I hope also today that you'll hear conversations that you haven't heard before. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to dive deeply into universal health coverage from the perspective of primary health care and family planning, so that we all leave this conference today better understanding what that concept means and how we all have a role to play within that. So with that, I want to thank you, welcome you again to the FP 2020 Plenary, and we'll start by hearing about postpartum and post-abortion family planning.
Quand moi j'ai eu mon premier enfant, j'ai choisi d'abord les pilules. Et entre-temps, je n'avais plus d'argent pour aller prendre. J'ai laissé. Et dans ça, là, j'ai eu encore à tomber enceinte. À chaque fois, c'est une question de moyens qui fait que je laisse. Nous étions nombreux dans la salle. Il a demandé s'il y avait quelqu'un qui voulait prendre le contraceptif là. J'ai dit que je voulais. Bon, il m'a expliqué, il m'a montré tous les contraceptifs. Et il m'a dit qu'avec mon âge là, que ça allait mieux avec moi. qu'ils choisissent ça. Je conseille mes soeurs là à choisir les plannings familiales parce que ça aide. Ça aide, surtout quand tu n'as pas les moyens et que les enfants viennent comme ça. C'est vraiment pas facile. Donc, c'est mieux de choisir les méthodes planning familial pour ne pas être surpris.
Good morning, everyone. Dear partner, dear delegate, let me start by saying the high political commitment of Burkina Faso at the top level of the state by the president himself for family planning. For those of you who were in Oslo for the Global Financing Facility event, we state that in our country, we invest 13% of our annual budget in health. Burkina Faso is on track in the journey to self-reliance and domestic resource mobilization. The president of Burkina Faso stated in Oslo at the GFF that Burkina Faso is on track and will achieve the set goal of 15% of the Abuja Declaration for domestic. Currently, since June 2016, we have in place a free health care for pregnant and lactating women and children under 5. And we are in the process of declaring family planning also free for all and all levels that include during postpartum and youth. Although we do not have a recent demographic and health survey, with the latest report of PMA 2020, it already provides us with a good picture of what we are doing in Burkina in regard to family planning. The average gain in modern MCPR for married and in union women historically in African countries was around 0.8 percentage point year. And in Burkina, from January 2017 to January 2018, we moved from 24.6% of MCPR to 30.1% CPR. This MCPR gain of 5.5 percentage points is one of the highest annual MCPR gain I ever seen. Also, the implant share of the modern contraceptive method mix in Burkina, already by far the highest in the world, last year at 48%, has increased to 50.3%. For unmarried, sexually active contraceptive users, the implant share has also risen notably from 18% to 29%. For women in union, the implant CPR is now 15% compared to 11% a year ago. Both of these represent the second highest implant prevalence in the world after Kenyan implant CPR, now 21%. The increase in implant CPR alone in Burkina Faso is 3.3 percentage points over the past year, about 60% as high as the overall MCPR gain of 5.6 percentage points. This to show our commitment for family planning and our engagement with all our partners to go further than where we are. Thank you very much.
In the community where I come from, a few years ago, young people never had access to family planning. This was because there was no information and the fear of going to the clinic or pharmacy or the judge. I wish I knew about family planning when I was young because it would have helped me decide when and how many children I want to have. I found my fellow youths sharing information on family planning. It helped me decide having an injectable family planning method.
We've noticed that there's been an increase in terms of young people utilizing the services for family planning, and we've advocated for the reduction of age of consent in terms of allowing these young people to access family planning services. That's the only way we'll be able to keep them in school and save them.
Today, youths in Mazapoka have full access to family planning because of the youth-friendly spaces in the clinics and the peer education offered to take up the family planning method to prevent them from having unplanned pregnancies.
If we don't educate the girls or they don't have access to family planning services, then we'll be able to lose them, and at the same time, they won't make enough contribution towards the economic development of the country.
Hello. Good morning, dear delegates. The world recently is witnessing a historic high of young people. With over 1.8 billion young people, it's a population we have never witnessed before. And pregnancy and childbirth complications are responsible for the major cause of death amongst young women between the ages of 15 and 19. That speaks in volumes to each and every one of us. Therefore, it's time for government, for each and every one of us, to see that young people have access to modern contraceptives. It is very important for young people to have access to information and services. And government should work to make sure that young people are meaningfully engaged in the provision of this information and where these services are delivered. Young people want to have proximity to family planning services where they are found. And these services must be available to give young people full options of the different family planning methods. We have situations where young people have a barrier of distance. They have they have to cover long distances to reach family planning services. And most of the times, when they get to these family planning services, they realize that the option that they need is not available. And the question is, how are we going to make sure that young people can have full access to the family planning method that they need? And we have to also realize that there are policies and laws that are hindering young people's access to family planning services. It's high time the government thinks about the next generation. Family planning is not just all about pregnancy. It's a long-term vision. We are looking at the rights of young people. We are looking at the future of young people. We are looking at the next generation. If we have to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, one very important point that we have to work on is full access to contraceptives for young people. Mansa, I'm sure you have something to add about that.
Oh, yeah. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for turning up for the last day of the conference. And I definitely have something to add to that, Andrew. Along with accessibility for young people, it definitely is important to also increase the acceptability of the conversation around sexual and reproductive health and rights. Within this conference, over the last 3 days, we've seen how young people are now empowered to be raising their voices and asserting their demands for their sexual and reproductive health and rights. But it is important for that conversation and dialogue to be happening both ways, and that requires for the international community to acknowledge and create an enabling environment that recognizes and realizes that adolescents and young people are indeed sexual beings. And that's really something that needs to be at the heart of this conversation. Another obviously extremely important component is the quality of services that we're providing for these young people. A lot of the conversation across the last 3 days have definitely begun framing this as a rights issue, as a choice issue, all important conversations that need to be happening, but there still seem to be more dominated by conversations around, introduction of new contraception, expanding the method mix. Again, important conversations to be having, but these conversations sometimes tend to sideline conversations around the quality of counseling, quality of method information, and most importantly, the dignity of healthcare. And I think we need to be hearing more of those conversations. At least that's what young people think. As a direct consequence of the kind of conversation that is taking place, it is very common at the grassroots level to notice that there is a certain amount of very low expectations, almost apathy with regards to quality of health care. And that is an important alarm bell to wake up to. It lets us know that it's important to instantly transform and elevate that conversation and really ensure that system preparedness is an important and sustained conversation that we're having that will really help us uphold the sexual and reproductive self-determination of adolescents, young people, and all other vulnerable groups that we want to serve.
And I will conclude by saying something. We as young people, we want to be involved in discussing, deciding, and implementing decisions that concern our lives. We want to talk about our lives. Thank you.
Over 700,000 Rohingya have fled violence in Myanmar in the past year, joining some 200,000 who have settled into overcrowded refugee camps in neighboring Bangladesh. Some Rohingya women lacked access to contraceptives when they lived in Myanmar. They arrived in Bangladesh with little knowledge of their rights and options, including the rights to avoid or delay pregnancy. By the time they are 15 years old, many already had children. In April, the Bangladesh Family Planning Directorate and UNFPA signed an agreement to provide reproductive health and family planning information and services to the Rohingya refugees and host communities in Cox's Bazar district without discrimination and with dignity and respect.
আমাদের ফিল্ড ভিজিট আছে যেটা মাসের মধ্যে 2টা কিংবা 3টা যতটা পারি সম্ভব করি ওদেরকে কাউন্সেলিং করব সেখানে শাশুড়ি থাকবে ননদ থাকবে দেবর থাকবে মানে ফ্যামিলি সবাই থাকবে সেখানে আমরা যে কাউন্সেলিং করে আসব যে এটা সুবিধা আছে আমাদের কাছে এটা আছে এটা নিলে আর আগে পদ্ধতি হলো তো ভুল করে জিয়া তো লাগাই আবার মানে এরা তো হচ্ছে একজনের কাছ থেকে শুনে যে একজনই দিছে ওরা তো সারা গ্রামে ছড়িয়ে যায় আমার এরকম ব্যথা লাগছে তুই দিস না এরকম
Good morning. You have just watched a video of those people who are the most persecuted and tortured minority on the world, the Rohingyas. They fled to Bangladesh from Myanmar to avert the atrocities and genocide. The Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, she was very kind and considering their plight, she decided to give them shelter. That is why she is known as the mother of humanity. Despite the resource constraints of Bangladesh, with the help of United Nations organizations, UNFPA, NGOs, we are trying to help these Rohingyas by offering accommodation, food, health, family welfare, nutrition, all this. Can you believe that more than 50,000 Rohingya pregnant women, they are taking care of the health services from the camps? Our government, Directorate General of Family Planning, our Ministry of Health, NGOs, all are providing all these supports. We would like to continue this kind of support. We like to part in some training to them. We are doing TOTs, training of trainers for the Rohingyas on family planning in the light of Islam. And we hope to continue this kind of support, but how long? Can you imagine 1.1 million people, a huge burden on Bangladesh? They have no hope, no aspirations, only waiting for relief every day, every moment. Can it be a life at all? We must find out a solution. The sooner is the better. Last week, I visited Rohingya camp. I met a Rohingya mother. She was looking numb, indifferent. She was telling that she lost her 2 sons. The Myanmar army first shot them down and then slaughtered in front of her to confirm their death. She was telling all this, but I found no tears in her eyes because she had no more tears to shed. Now, can we give back her sons back? Can we give her sons back? No. What we can give back is their safe and dignified return to their motherland, Myanmar. Let's all try together. Thank you very much.
What motivated me to become an advocate? I saw a lot of young people around me, also within my own family, get pregnant, leave school. Becoming an advocate was sort of automatic.
Yolanda has raised an issue. What drives accountability?
Civil society groups have worked very closely with government here in Kenya and have been able to ensure that there's a facilitative and very supportive policy environment. Civil society groups have also been in the forefront of pushing for increased domestic financing, and we've seen significant improvements when you invest in comprehensive education programs, adequate supplies, family planning commodities, when you make sure that those commodities are available where women, the people who need them, can access them, then you are giving women the opportunity to make decisions that give them control not just over their bodies, but over their lives, which makes family planning then life planning.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. That story from Rosemary in Kenya, it's a story of members of the CSOs. We are never short of stories, and I will tell you mine. My name is Halima Sharif. I was born in a little village along the coastal town of Tanga in Tanzania. I was the firstborn of 4 in a family of 4, 3 young brothers and myself. I remember during my adolescence years, I would, occasionally, sometimes regularly, hear my dad and mom go, quarreling, some little noises in their bedroom. That did not settle well with me. I would wake my brothers up and tell them, Mom and Dad, there's no peace in that room. You better get out of here, go into the room, cry, appeal to Mom, appeal to Dad, that you know what? We don't want Mom to leave. We don't want you guys to fight, because that will bring a lot of instability in our family, and things will fall apart. And I gave them another line, that we are going to be strict children. I don't know where I got those lines, but I did that. And in a few minutes, my dad would say, okay, boys, go back to bed. And I'll take my brothers, wipe their tears, put them to bed. That is my personal story. And I took that passion to journalism. Found myself working with the Daily News, later working with Deutsche Welle in Germany. I would always focus on issues of rights. I would write about gender equality. I would look at the sociocultural practices that actually discriminated against women. I would look at issues of reproductive health, very much interested in adolescent sexual and reproductive health. And you know what? That put me in a whole new world, a more exciting world, a world of CSOs. And in Tanzania, those days of the early, I guess late 90s, early 2000s, CSOs would work alone in silos, do their project proposal, go, implement them, mobilize people. We were working alone, walking alone in silos, engaging members of parliament, to an extent that one day, the Speaker of the House said, enough, CSOs, you come to Dodoma, where the parliamentary sessions normally happen, you take the valuable time of members of parliament, each of you do the same thing. You're working around women's health, you're working around rights. Can't you coordinate yourself? That made us thinking. That got us thinking. A few of us, including myself, sat down and thought, how could we do things better? How could we show that CSOs are critical in reproductive health? CSOs are critical in ensuring that women and young people and men get access to contraceptives. We began to change. Our National Family Planning Technical Working Groups that are chaired by the Ministry of Health, we decided that no more single project presentations. We need thematic presentations, where service delivery will tell us their story, capacity building will come up with some new interventions and lessons, and so forth. You know what? That united us so much. That gave us the power of partnership. We were able, especially after FP 2020 in 2012, we were able to organize ourselves to make an impact. We focused in the Lake and Western Zone, where the CPR is low, and we were able to bring it up. We are talking about the last mile at the moment. We're looking at what lessons have we learned to build on them. It's no longer about logos of your organization. It's no longer about, this project has more money. It's about how do we work together as CSOs. The power of partnership, ladies and gentlemen, has grown in Tanzania, and it's so exciting right now to work with CSOs and partner with government. But one thing I wanted to add, advocacy is the core. Is the core for all of us as CSOs to partner with governments to make sure what issues we bring to them, what is the data we're sharing with them, to engage our donors so that they see the value in investing in what we are doing. But I want to leave this with you. I am a lifetime advocate. I sometimes don't even look at my age. I don't look at my background. I just look at what drives me, what drives CSOs globally and at national level to improve the situation of women and children, to enable them access contraceptives, to enable them decide whether, when, and how many children they would want to have. And that is a human right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I want to thank all of you. That was really incredible. Now I look forward to the next part. We're going to have a bit of a discussion, and I get the honor of introducing my partner in leading FP 2020 and my friend, Martin Smith. Martin, please join us on the stage.
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed. Great to be here with all of you, and thank you particularly to our wonderful panel for their motivational words that came after what I hope you agree were a series of 4 very inspirational videos, which together give us some insight into the individual, regional, and collective impact of the FP 2020 partnership. And the purpose of this panel is just to delve a bit deeper and explore that theme of impact at the country, the regional, and the collective level a little bit further. And so, Professor Mehta, if I might turn to you first. As you said in your speech, you play many roles on the global, on the regional, and on the national stage. And one of those roles is, of course, as reference group member of the FP 2020 reference group representing the Ouagadougou Partnership. And I'm interested to know how you take 9 countries with very different situations, very different perspectives, and you bring that into a coherent plan for joint work and joint priority to achieve the very ambitious goals that the Ouagadougou Partnership set in 2011 and then reiterated in 2015.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much. You know, you already said what is Ouagadougou Partnership. For me, it is a common agenda of 9 countries in West Africa and beyond. It is a common set objective of 9 countries and now a community of best practitioners. And we have now the support of FP20, and my role is not so much because the biggest role is played by Fatima Tassi, you know well. And my role was to mobilize all Ministry of Health in Ouagadougou Partnership country and make this dynamic to always show what the countries that perform well are doing to attain this performance and compare to those lagging behind and share experience by country visit and share experience in various meetings and share documentation to apply the best practice performers are doing. So this is what we are doing with the support of our president. I already mentioned that my president is more engaged than me in this family planning issue. And in Oslo, he was so powerful to say that invest in women is invest in country development.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Minister, for your leadership, the President's leadership, and the critical role that you play for the Ouagadougou Partnership within the FP 2020 movement. And Mansour, if I can turn to you next. I think we've seen a glimpse of the firebrand advocacy that you bring in India and on the global stage. And I'm interested to know what you think is the single most important ingredient in building a successful movement. Just a small question for you.
Yeah. I mean, from what I've learned from looking around me and from a lot of the older feminists within my context, I don't think anybody in this room will disagree that the single most important ingredient of any movement lies in its people and its people-centeredness. And as much as, I mean, if we're truly looking to take family planning out of just these spaces and, you know, create a worldwide global movement, it would be important for us to start looking beyond institutional partnerships immediately and really look at building equal partnerships with the people that we want to serve. And I think that's the first most important part and ingredient of movement building. I think what, you know, that said, I think what this community has been extremely successful in doing is galvanizing great data that has given us insights into how better we can plan within our countries to advance family planning, family planning goals. That said, I think maybe the data is telling us some important stories, but the more important stories really lie with the people and in their lived realities. For instance, my story is that I grew up in a state in India where, because of a health minister's statement, overnight there was a blanket ban on emergency contraception. And because of this blanket ban on emergency contraception, friends and I had to travel across borders, state borders, but nevertheless borders, as adolescents and young people to access emergency contraception. Now, to access that emergency contraception as a young person who has just started college also put us at, you know, a financial sort of strain, because young people lack the financial independence that adult allies perhaps have. So that's an important strain that it put on us. But more importantly, at that point, my friends and I weren't interested in planning a family. All we were looking for was how not to plan a family, really. And that simply was out of our reach, which is a fundamental violation of our sexual and reproductive rights, as I'm sure all young people in this room will agree. And that's where you really begin to see that if, as a global community, we want to work towards a global intent and interest in upholding the sexual and reproductive self-determination of all vulnerable groups with regards to access to family planning, well, global intent and global interest don't organically manifest. They're manufactured. They're constructed one brick at a time. And that really means we need to inject diversity into our international community in order for it to be truly international. And that might mean that some of us as stakeholders might have to step back and allow for more adolescents, young people, and vulnerable groups to come to the table, build equal partnerships with them, and really work towards accelerating universal access to family planning.
Great, thank you very much, Mansa. So connect with and respond to the lived realities of people within the partnership. Thank you very much indeed. And Additional Secretary Islam, if I can come to you next, and thank you very much indeed for your very moving words. And Bangladesh, as an original commitment maker in 2012, of course, made 9 very specific commitments at the 2017 FP Summit that were very ambitious. And I'm intrigued to hear from you about how the country is doing, because those commitments really set the roadmap for family planning for Bangladesh through 2020 and beyond.
Thank you very much. I feel proud to see my secretary, Mr. G.M. Saleuddin, and the Director General of Family Planning, the Department of Bangladesh, and also my Bangladesh delegation. Entire delegation is sitting here. So I thank you, sir, for your kind presence. Yes, you're right. We have 9 commitments. Those looked ambitious. But fortunately, we are moving very well. You know, in Bangladesh, the CPR has come down. It is now 2.05.
The TFR?
TFR, yes. It is 2.05. CPR is increasing. The population growth is also decreasing. And we are trying to harmonize our all efforts to the grassroots level. We are trying to rejuvenate the committees who are responsible for functioning the family welfare centers. We are going there to the remote areas. Our Secretary, Director General, high officials, they are going to the remote areas to encourage the people for institutional delivery so that they can get access to the contraceptives. They can decide, they can choose which kind of methods they can use. So these are the things, and also the political leadership, our Honorable Health Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, they are also very keen to see the successes. And you know, we achieved the MDG goals, and especially the child mortality, and our maternal mortality rate is also going down. So all these indicators shows that we are on the right track, and we will be succeeding, hopefully, inshallah.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much for the Secretary and your inspirational leadership within Bangladesh and within the FP 2020 movement. And Halima, if I can turn to you next, and thank you so much for your passionate advocacy of NGO involvement in the movement. And of course, you have been such a fundamental part of FP 2020 from the very beginning. You worked in our country engagement working group. You are now the civil society focal point for FP 2020 in Tanzania. And I'm interested to know your contrasting experience of those roles and the impact that you feel you've been able to have on FP 2020 in Tanzania and beyond in those roles and other roles that you play within family planning.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think being a member of the Country Engagement Working Group a few years back, when FP 2020 was just taking off, and it was not an appointment, it was individuals applying for a position in those committees. I'm sure those of us who started remembered that. So for me, that was the climax almost of what I was trying to do back home in the CSO community, and the urge to share whatever was happening in Tanzania and to get to learn from other global partners so that we can better the interventions in Tanzania. So for me, it was an opportunity. It made me, expand my knowledge on, some studies on the CIP, on where the technical and financial gaps are, and what is it that we can do at the FP 2020 level and make sure that FP 2020 becomes a movement. So I don't want to boast, but I'm feeling I have been part of the FP 2020 movement. Because when I went back home, I was a voice that CSOs, we may be doing our own work here, but there's FP 2020, and our country is committed to implement a few things, a few commitments. So it was a voice I kept the FP 2020 alive in the discussions in our National Family Planning Technical Working Group, and took back the feedback and some of the stories to the global partnership. So now that I'm a FP 2020 focal person, CSO focal person in Tanzania, I think it's a continuity of what I love to do best. And I think it's also an inspiration for the younger generation, because I'm sure after a year or two, somebody else will be taking over. and there's definitely an impact. And I won't claim that impact is solely from my hands and my brain. The impact is from how best the CSO community took up the FP 2020 agenda and how best we are strategizing and so serious about complementing government efforts to attain the commitments, increasing domestic resources, increasing domestic funds, making sure that we improve and increase method mix, especially in the primary, the tertiary and secondary, as well as the young people, making services accessible to them. So I feel blessed, I feel inspired, I feel happy that I'm part of this important movement.
Thank you
and
very
we are
much.
going to get there.
Thank you very much indeed, Halima. And a friend and a key person for FP 2020 and the FP movement for many years to come. But I loved your your point about emerging young leaders. And so as I move into our final question of this panel session, it's great to turn to you, Andrew. And thank you for speaking so eloquently about the role of young people in the movement. And I'm intrigued to know, as the Executive Director of Youth Health International, as a doctor, what are you seeing on the ground in Cameroon that is most effective in serving the needs of our younger clients?
Okay, thank you very much, Martin. The first thing I would like to highlight is the government of Cameroon is doing so much work to realizing and attaining its FP 2020 commitment. And we can see a lot of results because from the indicators, you can realize that young people like never before have access to family planning services. And these are not just any kind of services. We now have services where young people go to these services and they don't experience judgmental attitudes from staffs, and they have access to different family planning options that they need, which was never the case because right now in Cameroon, I don't think that the problem that young people face actually is going to be the availability of contraceptives. Yes, the government has done so much to make sure that at every level, subnational and the district levels, the commodities are available for young people. And the government is working so hard on that. It's also something very important to emphasize on the fact that much has been done to really get the young people engaged. Because right from the basic level, we have comprehensive sexuality education, right from the basic and the colleges and the university. And most of these programs have young people at the forefront of it. They are there to design these programs, they are there to implement these programs, and they are there to monitor and evaluate the impact of this program. And I think that is something very unique, and it's something very important that they are doing, because young people, their voices are now heard louder and in an amplified way that it has never been done. And I think that it's something that they are doing that is very, very important towards attaining the FP 2020 commitments that they made.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you for raising your voice. Thank you for working and raising up the voices of millions of young people around the world. And thank you, in conclusion, to 5 great leaders of the global family planning movement on stage, 5 great champions of FP 2020, and also to acknowledge the thousands of other champions that are out there that are together helping to build and maintain and accelerate what we hope is an increasingly impactful movement. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Let's give them another hand. I think that was an incredible conversation and very inspiring. And Halima, I love what you said about learning from other global partners. And I think that's the heart of the FP 2020 movement. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite our next panelists up to the stage. And we're going to have a conversation now about how sort of global frameworks, the SDGs, this concept of universality and universal health coverage are helping to shape all of our programs and our work. So as they're moving forward, I'll let you know that we have with us today Dr. Ian Askew, who is the director of the World Health Organization's Reproductive Health and Research Program, and Ian is also a reference group member. We have Poonam Mutreja, who's the executive director of the Population Foundation of India. We have Mitchell Warren, who's the executive director of AVAC. And I'm very honored to say that we also have Dr. Edna Adan Ishmael, who's the founder of the Edna Adan Hospital and the former foreign minister of Somaliland. So please join me in welcoming our next panel. So Ian, I'm going to start with you if I may. Ian is, as I said, a reference group member, and when we were together in July in Seattle, Ian gave a fabulous intervention explaining the concept of universal health coverage from a rights-based framework. And Ian, I've asked you to unfortunately condense that 15-minute intervention into just a few minutes here, but please help our audience to understand how you and the World Health Organization are understanding universal health coverage.
Thank you, Beth. Is that on? Okay. To understand universal health coverage, we really have to start with the Sustainable Development Agenda. As you're probably, I hope are all well aware, there is an SDG 3.8. And let me just read that out to you, because that's the core of what universal health coverage is. It's financial risk protection, access to quality essential healthcare services, and access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for all. And those last two words at the end are very, very important, because that definition sets us aside, sets the SDG expectations separately from the Millennial Development Goals. Because after the MDGs, we had an unfinished agenda, if you recall, certainly in terms of family planning. And this is why family planning is so central to the SDGs. In fact, it's so central, there are two other SDGs related to family planning. We have SDG 3.7, about access to reproductive health services, including family planning. And we have SDG 5.6, which is all about rights and about people's autonomy to make decisions about their reproductive health and sexual rights. So there's this marked difference. Now we're in the SDG era, and it's critically important to bear that in mind, because it differentiates and helps to define universal health coverage. Two aspects I want to bring out. One is that within the SDGs, we often hear, it's written down very clearly, the expression, leave no one behind. And this is critically important because it relates to those two words I said at the beginning, essential access to all services for all. And this is a major issue, equitable access for people who need the services. Secondly, so this is why we're using universal coverage for everyone to have access to services. But secondly, the Sustainable Development Goals are proposed and being addressed from a very integrated, comprehensive approach. We're not looking just at health by itself. Health is integrated more broadly, not only within the health sector itself, but across other sectors of development. And so this is a critically important difference, that we're not looking now at family planning as a standalone, single direction program. It has to be integrated and comprehensively addressed. Secondly, I want to raise three key human rights principles that underlie universal health coverage, because again, this is critically important in understanding the concept and how it can be operationalized. First of all, and I'm not a human rights lawyer, but my friends are, and they tell me this is the correct language. Governments around the world have what's called a minimum core obligation. And this is an obligation by governments to make sure that everyone in the country has the basic protection of their human rights. And we can translate this in terms of universal health coverage by the expectation that governments must provide a minimum core essential set of health services. Secondly, the right to health. We all know that the right to health is a key human right, but we also know that we can't just go overnight to achieving the right to health, and particularly in terms of universal health coverage. So there is the human rights concept of progressive realization, that countries should move along a clearly defined roadmap to achieve universal coverage. And thirdly, there's the principle of prioritizing marginalized and vulnerable populations, people living at the edge of society that really need to receive the full impact of investments and benefit of access to services. These groups must be prioritized in any response and any development of a human rights approach to universal health coverage. I just want to end by mentioning operationalization of universal health coverage, because what I've just described are very lofty goals and general principles. But what does that mean in practice? And I wanted to raise 2 points here. One is that universal health coverage is an approach that is a health systems approach. It's and within a health system, it's a primary healthcare approach. And we all know there was a major conference recently which reiterated this approach. And it's one which we have to bear in mind going forward. So primary healthcare, and particularly for family planning, everything has to start at the primary level. And secondly, that primary healthcare and universal health coverage within that is looking at health services from a benefits package perspective, packages of interventions. What makes sense to be what is often termed the best buy? And we know, we've heard repeatedly throughout this conference that family planning is a best buy. But that argument needs to be made through evidence and needs to be made within countries themselves. So I just want to conclude by asking and reminding people that everyone in the room has a role to play in trying to move forward with universal health coverage and to make sure that family planning is central to that. Because technically, those of you that work in ministries of health and in research groups and so on can help to put together the evidence to what are the technical packages of family planning services that a particular country should be implementing. But, and the big but, is that the choice of what is covered in a universal health coverage package is ultimately a political decision, because there are choices to be made. And when choices are to the fore, it's politicians, parliamentarians that make those choices quite often. And so those parliamentarians in the room, we need to appeal to you to really prioritize family planning in universal health coverage, and to make sure that even within that, the most effective, most acceptable and highest quality services are prioritized. But for those of you in the room that are maybe either healthcare providers, parliamentarians, but most of all, everyone in the room here is a citizen somewhere. And citizens vote in parliamentarians, and the parliamentarians give the jobs to the health sector. So as citizens, make sure that you're voting in people who have family planning at the core of their beliefs and feel that that should be an essential part of universal health coverage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. That was fabulous. The concepts of universality, of equity, of rights, and understanding what that means within healthcare is, I think, something very dear to everyone in this room. So thank you for explaining that in such an articulate and passionate way. And it's a perfect segue to Poonam Mutreja, who is a lifelong feminist, a fabulous advocate, and who has tried to realize those concepts in partnership with government throughout your life. So can you share your perspectives on how to advocate for and push for these concepts of equity and access and choice for women?
So I come from a country which has the oldest family planning program in the world. I come from a country where huge progress has been made in the last 65 years. I also come from a country where the glass is only half full. I say that because, let me give the evidence for that. The current use of modern contraception, as per the latest National Family Health Survey, is 48%. So it's the data that speaks. I am not making a value judgment, but I'd like to say I come from an organization, Population Foundation of India, which is all set to celebrate its 50th anniversary. And our founder, J.R.D. Tata, who was a great industrialist in India, founded PFI to work and strengthen the government. So when you ask the question of Mansa, what is the most important ingredient of civil society? I totally agree with her, success of civil society. It is women, it is the people. But if you're not able to work with the government, fight with the government, strengthen the government, it is my right to point out, as a civil society member of the international community and Indian community, to point out to my government. And now I want to talk about how we work with the government. You know, India has made success only in spite of having only 5 contraceptive methods until 2016, when 3 new methods were introduced. We worked tirelessly with the government on increasing the method mix. I have to say that it is not the government. Yes, the political commitment was, India's had a history, which many of you know, I don't have the time to talk about, where political commitment for a long time to family planning was a problem, but we still chugged along with 5 contraceptive methods, and it is the feminist movement which should have been at the forefront of increasing methods that contributed to coming in the way of the government to introduce a new method. We worked, but the ICPD and then following ICPD, it is the tragedy of 16 women who died in Bilaspur in sterilization camps that hit India in a big way. It didn't hit just civil society, it hit the media, but most importantly, I'd like to say our government, our health ministry, the center was as pained as any of us to see these women lose their lives. Women have been losing their lives to maternal deaths, abortion, family planning for a long time in botched sterilizations. But the tragedy of Bilaspur, which was amplified by the international media, the Indian media, the NGOs, civil society, and it hit the women too. And that was a tipping point where a lot got accelerated, and we worked with the government. When we went to civil society, led by PFI, went to do a report, I have to say we had cooperation, encouragement of the government, the center government, to go and do this inquiry. And within 10 days of our coming out with the report, the government had sent orders. Dr. Sikdar, who's here, the Deputy Commissioner of Family Planning, who I respectfully call the Czar of Family Planning, had in place guidelines for quality, but they were not implemented at the district and state level. Dr. Sikdar got onto his feet and with his team went across the country training and ensuring. But in the meantime, I'd like to say that India still needs to expand and deepen its basket of choice. I want every woman in India and the world to have access, and I'm going to fight for it. And PFI as an institution, and all of us must fight for it. What you call universal health to access, to me means every woman in the world should have access to every contraceptive that is available in the world and has been approved, and we should do that in a hurry. And I look forward to implants and the subcutaneous injectables coming to India with the fantastic commitment that our government has.
Great. I look forward to that as well, Poonam. Thank you. I mentioned before that Poonam was a founding member of the reference group for FP 2020. You can imagine how this passion, your experience, and your vision have really helped to drive that group and our partnership overall. So thank you so much, Poonam. Next, I'd like to go to Mitchell Warren, who's a new friend for FP 2020. And Mitchell has really opened the door for FP 2020, and I know many of you were already doing this, but at least from this leadership level, to work together with the HIV/AIDS community, because we all know that integrated programs are essential for women's healthcare, and this vision that Ian laid out of primary healthcare, where you're receiving your services that meet all of your needs in one place, has to be the vision going forward. So Mitchell, share with us why you reached out to the family planning community and what your vision for integrated programming is.
Great. Well, thank you, Beth, and thank you, FP 2020. You know, for me, it's very much like coming home. I think for many of us who've worked in HIV for the last 30 years, many of us came from a sexual reproductive health background. And the sad news really is that as we have seen more resources and more advances in the HIV response, I think it's safe to say we've seen these fields grow in parallel. And so if I told you, as is often said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes a lot. If I told you there was a conference that would gather thousands of people for several days to talk about informed choice, to talk about universal health coverage, that would talk about human rights and rights-based approaches, that would talk about the centrality of young people, not as the recipients of, but as the leaders of our work, you might think I'm talking about Kigali. How many of you were in Amsterdam just a few months ago? when thousands of other people, many of people from your organizations and some of you yourselves were in a similar kind of conversation. And I think the good news is that we're having similar conversations. The bad news is that we're having similar conversations in parallel and not together enough. And I think we've really tried to begin to address that. And one of the drivers for this is a very immediate need. And there was a wonderful session yesterday with WHO around thinking about planning over the next several months around the ECHO trial, a trial that you all will know, that you all are aware of and think about from a contraceptive perspective. And those of us who work in HIV think about its implications for HIV. But at the end of the day, this is not about HIV or about family planning. This is about how we understand evidence, how we act on it together, and how we help women and men make good decisions. And I think the better we do together, the faster we do this together, the more impact we can have. And that's a very short-term immediate need, which is how we in FP 2020 and hopefully many others in the room will work together over the next several months. But I also flash forward to 2020. It's in your name, Beth, not your personal name, but FP 2020. And again, in Amsterdam, thousands of people talked about a 2020 target. It wasn't the FP 2020 target. It was an HIV target by 2020 to actually be reaching epidemic control. I would argue if we reached epidemic control, a target we will not meet, and we don't meet FP 2020 targets, we will have failed young women and young men. Similarly, if we meet FP 2020 targets, which I know are going to be a stretch to say the least, and we don't meet the HIV 2020 target, we fail. We rise together, we fall together. And I think we've got to figure out what the 2020 targets are, not for any one disease, not for any one health issue, but for our collective. And I think that's really where Ian, you started with universal health coverage. So I would just say, you know, at the end of the day, this idea of informed choice, and I know in family planning sometimes, given that so much money seemed to move to the HIV world, if it's any comfort, you all are often referred to with great admiration and affection. The HIV world is jealous of what the family planning world has done when we think about a method mix. And people think you have this incredible array of contraceptive methods. But I think what we all know in this room is that a method mix that product developers created that is not delivered to all women and men in a comprehensive way, in an evidence-based way, and in an empathetic way, is not a method mix. It's a hypothetical method mix. And so we've got to make a real mix for both HIV prevention and for contraception that is truly about informed choice, which means that actual methods are procured and available. That means providers are trained not just in the individual methods, but in the conversations that need to be had around those methods. And that it all has to be in a rights-based approach, where we empower people to be informed and make decisions themselves. And it's that three-part agenda of providing the product, again, whether it's HIV or family planning, that we do much different and much more robust provider training, and fundamentally that we empower people to make decisions themselves, not for them, but that they get to make those decisions. That's what informed choice is, and that's the message that is not a family planning message. It is not an HIV message. That has got to be our collective, comprehensive, integrated, and sustained response that we do together. And I'm really excited to be here, and I'm more excited actually to leave here with all of you on a shared path and a shared journey ahead.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mitchell. That beautifully articulates the vision that we have of starting with the woman and thinking about her needs and a system that responds to that. And the aspects that you've laid out, I think, are really going to be inspiring to all of us as we go forward from here. And Dr. Adan, the reason that I'm asking you to speak as the fourth speaker of the panelists is because I think each of the aspects that were discussed by the other three are part of your vision that you've actually put into place and work for every day with the Dr. Adan Hospital in Somaliland, which you set up to meet the needs of women and girls. So please share your experience and your vision with all of us.
Well, thank you very much. It really is a great honor and a pleasure to be here today and to be energized by all that is happening in the world, to hear about the voice of the young people. This is a step forward. I have waited to see this. I I retired from the World Health Organization after a long career. I come from a country, Somaliland, in the Horn of Africa, a country you don't know about because you don't hear about it. And when I retired 21 years ago, my country was a country that was left for dead. No health professionals. Those who had been trained in the past had either been killed or left the country. No health facilities. And the choice open to me at that time was to retire and go and settle somewhere and find a lake and some pigeons and feed pigeons with dry bread and, crossword puzzles, or go home and see what I could do with what I had. Having been a health professional for many years, someone who had the privilege of having been the first nurse and the first midwife of my country, I felt that this was the day, this is what I was trained to do. The resources I had were what I had from my pension, my terminal benefits, my savings, my trinkets, things that I no longer had any need for. So I just recycled my whole life, recycled everything I had into cold cash, went home and tried to do something with what I had. And there were bridges to be built, hospitals to be built, houses to be built, landmines to be removed. I couldn't do any of those, but being a midwife, I could train midwives. This is what I had been doing all my life. So I set up a hospital. It took me 4 years to build it, but while the hospital was being built, I also started training the nurses who would work in that hospital when it eventually would become finished. That was the beginning of my ambition to train 1,000 midwives for my country, Somaliland. Ambitious, yes. Many thought it would be impossible. But last month, we have reached a total of 1,048 midwives trained in Somaliland, not by my hospital alone, but in 7 health facilities and training schools throughout Somaliland. Now, we have the buildings and we have the staff. We have a base. What we are now also working on is training pharmacists and lab technicians and doctors. My focus is comprehensive reproductive health. Family planning cannot stand alone. I need to save that woman who is living in that valley, who is living in an area which is so isolated, with 60% of our people living in a nomadic life. 60% of our people are not reached for whatever we have, however little it is, they have no access. So midwives being mobile, we train them to go to the villages and to live in the towns among the people where they were from, where they are known and trusted, and where they have the confidence of the people to provide health, maternal and child care, prenatal care, and family planning, of course. This is a message that I wish to leave for the world. If it can be done in Somaliland, it can be done anywhere. Yes, it's not the total solution, but it's the beginning, and it's a determination. The ingredient, the most essential ingredient, is that determination to want to do something, and to do it with what you have. Do it where you need to do it, and do it for those who need you to do whatever you can for them the most. And I would really like to express my great admiration and appreciation for what is happening in this great country that we're in, Rwanda. I was here 12 years ago as a foreign minister, and 12 years later, the transformation that I see in this great country is enormous and very impressive. There's so much we can learn from each other. My next target, and I never end the day without targets, and I never end the day without plans. I'm 81, but I still have long-planned targets. Is my country, Somaliland, is bigger than 18 countries in Africa. It's as big as England and Wales combined. It has a population of 4 million people. And 60% of those people are nomads. They don't live in towns. My target, my ambition, my hope, my prayer is that, first of all, I will have trained teachers who will train girls and boys in schools so that they will acquire the knowledge and the skills to be able to read and write and benefit from any training that we can offer them. And the second ambition that I have is that before I get called to other functions elsewhere, that I will have at least 20 or 30 comprehensive reproductive health centers that are scattered throughout the country, strategically located, where women and girls and men can go and seek reproductive health. And we in Somaliland are ready to collaborate, to work with anybody who is willing to come and work with us. By the way, Somaliland is safe, Somaliland is stable. I live there. So if anybody tells you you cannot go there, don't believe it. I live there. If it were not safe and comfortable, I wouldn't be there myself. But there is so much that can be done, and there is so much that needs to be done. And thank you for this great opportunity to share this experience with the world and to learn from the world. And it really has given me a lot of satisfaction to see that from the days when I worked with the World Health Organization, in 1965, when I first joined the WHO, when we were trying to introduce very timidly and very hesitantly family planning, that today it's a part of the health services that is demanded and that is available and that is so openly part of the healthcare that we provide to our communities. We have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Thank you very much.
Wow. I'm not going to get this phrase right, but it's that phrase, Dr. Adan, of never doubt that the passion of one person can change the world. In fact, nothing else ever has. And thank you so much for coming here and inspiring us all with your life vision and the fact that you want to make a difference every day. And I think that that's something that you have in common with everyone in this room, that we're all here because we want to make a difference, and you've shown us a path forward. So thank you so much. So Ian, it's not fair. I'm going to turn to you next because I really wanted to ask you to take up that vision. Dr. Adan talked about the world that she entered in WHO in 1965 and her life's career of moving that forward. And we see now in Dr. Tedros a similar kind of a vision for moving forward and meeting the needs of every single person. And so from WHO's perspective, what are the steps that you're going to take to make this happen? What's different in your world now with this concept of universality and the SDGs?
Well, I think first of all, one of the key differences is the vision and the expectation of what the World Health Organization should be doing. And I've only been with the World Health Organization 3 years, but I've seen already just in the last 12, 18 months, a huge change in the expectation internally and the expectation externally of what WHO's role is and should be. Within the UN system, WHO's role is to be the leader in health. And so we're all working very hard at the moment to put that into practice. What does it mean to be a leader in health? Because we're not the only agency working in health systems and health care. But as the agency that is intended to be looking at health most broadly, then we have a responsibility to take that vision and to think ahead and to think more broadly. And at the moment we're focusing very much on the challenge put up by the heads of state from Ghana and from Germany and from Norway to put together a global health agenda for SDG 3. And this is something which we're working on to try to make sure that what we put forward is a visionary plan that integrates and provides comprehensive approaches that really is focusing on equity and making sure that, as I've said several times, we leave no one behind. And that prioritization is reflected in the primary healthcare approach. And it's reflected also in Dr. Tedros' personal push within the organization to put the countries at the heart. He constantly berates those of us that live and work in Geneva, that for too long, headquarters has been the big head of WHO, but going forwards, he really wants the primary role to be at the country level. And so it won't open overnight, but certainly throughout his duration of being Director General, you will see a transformation in the role of country offices around the world for WHO to be able to work with and support national health systems, to work with the education sector, to work with parliaments, to work with others involved in this broader agenda of health within a sustainable development agenda generally.
Thank you. Thank you for helping us all to understand the World Health Organization a little better. Many people are fairly distant from the places where these activities are shaped. We all feel the impact of it, but we're not quite sure how the vision was articulated and how we get there. So thank you for helping everybody with that. Michelle, I'm going to turn to you next because I think you raised an important point, which is that we're off track to meet the FP 2020 goal. I know that we'll reach it in a few years longer, and we're going to get there. The incredible movement and momentum that we feel in this room reinforces that every day. The HIV/AIDS community has set goals and also reached them a few years later than they had anticipated. As an advocate, what advice can you give to this room about what it means to set goals, what it means to be a part of a movement, and what it means to keep moving forward to achieve those, even if it takes longer than you might have anticipated?
Thanks so much, Beth. We've been huge advocates for the importance of target setting. Targets are fantastic. And we often sometimes joke perhaps about the ambition of a 2020 target for either FP or for HIV that may not be met. I always look back to, for me, one of the most important moments in target setting in public health. It was actually when WHO, at the time, Jim Kim was leading the HIV program, and he said something that no one believed, which is, let's get 3 million people on antiretroviral therapy by 2005, the so-called 3x5 target. No one believed it was going to happen, and it didn't happen. But it was catalytic. We wouldn't have a global fund, we wouldn't have a PEPFAR without it. One would argue, I would argue, that we wouldn't have FP 2020 if we didn't have bold, ambitious targets. I do think, though, we need to be really clear how we create targets. It's important that they be ambitious, but it's also important that they be practical, feasible, that they be resourced, and that they have a collective understanding. I think sometimes we've seen targets set from a donor, or from a policy, or from community's perspective. And to be successful, we need targets that have a shared vision, because without it, we will get off track very quickly. So I think targets, without a target, we don't get resources. Without resources, we can't make the progress that we need. And we shouldn't look at targets that have been missed as a bad thing, as long as the next set of targets are adding and iterating based on what we learn. When we saw 3x5 not met, what you then saw was a new set of targets that were pivoting and recognizing what didn't happen, why they weren't met, and how to realign the approach. And I think the most important thing for me is, and I've said this a lot in the HIV world, I do not want to be in a meeting in 2020 where we have this big unveil that says we missed the target in 2020. We need to have targets that are managed daily, weekly, quarterly. And if you were, I don't work in a business, but if one does work in a business, you see quarterly reports. If you are off track 1 month or 1 quarter, you look at what course corrections you need to make. And I know that's what FP 2020 is doing. I know that's what your report this week that's so important, that you need to be looking in real time, or as real time as the data is available, and make those course corrections. The last thing we want to do is miss a target and only realize it after the target time is up. Let's be sure that every quarter we're looking and saying, are we off track? If we are, how do we get closer to on track? And then I think we might find that we get a little bit closer to that progress. And I think the one final thing I'd say is, in all of these spaces, never confuse success with progress. I think we sometimes beat ourselves up because we didn't reach a target and we didn't succeed, or we declare success too soon. I think we need to be very clear-eyed about what progress we're making, which is remarkable in all of these spaces, but what is not happening, who is left behind, and how we realign in real time to get on track.
Thank you so much. I think that's very encouraging to all of us. Dr. Adan, if I could ask you, what is your vision for how we all work together from 2020 to 2030? What would you like us to achieve as a partnership and as a global movement for women in family planning?
I think we need to start from the grassroots. We need to listen to the voice of those who have been served the least Because in every community, there are certain stratas. There's one level that has a choice. They can travel, they have the means to seek whatever services they require anywhere in the world. There's a second level that is close to big cities, that has maybe jobs, that has some resources to benefit from whatever is available locally in their country. But there's a big chunk of people who have no voice, who have no education, who have no means of transportation, who have no knowledge of their rights, who have no knowledge of what is available in the community. And those are the ones I would like to see served the most and to be given the biggest attention to. When you have a woman brought to your hospital in the middle of the night with a child in labor, a shoulder presentation, the only person that woman had was her 9-year-old daughter, who the mother said, pull on the prolapsing arm, just pull and pull until the arm comes off. We get a woman who is shocked, a baby that is dead, and a 9-year-old child who is in shock herself. I don't want to see that anywhere in the world. We need trained people, we need skilled people, and we need basic facilities. It's not the icing we need to worry about, it's the cake itself. It's that bread itself. It's those crumbs that we need to look for. Thank you.
As well. Thank you for being such a passionate advocate and for living this as a role model. I think that you've inspired everyone in this room today. Poonam, I'm going to give you the last word. You were with us when we started FP 2020 in 2012. We're coming up to the corner of 2020, and we're all talking together about what this vision should be of partnership going forward to 2030. You know us from the inside out. What are your thoughts?
While giving access to 120 million additional women was okay, got it. The goal when FP 2020 began was to give 120 million additional women access to family planning. I did not only see the numbers. India made ambitious goals and commitment, and I was very proud of the ambitious commitment, as I was of FP 2020, the commitment that we made. But what really, we should look at the huge, not just externalities, look at the momentum in 69 countries. Let's face it, family planning was not a political issue in many of the commitment countries. And it is more than a commitment issue. And sometimes and often when you are advocating for political commitment and beginning and introducing new methods and contraceptions in countries, it takes time. Because one of the things that FP 2020 has stressed on and advocated for, as many of us independently too have, is not just access to contraception, but dignity, rights, measurement, respect, quality of care. If you want all that, we should be quite proud to say we've done all that, but we haven't met that target, 120 million. But we've done much more than meeting the targets. And for me, honestly, sitting on the table, I used to see this as just the short-term agenda, the goal of 120 million. As I saw SDGs coming, I see a long-term agenda for FP 2020. FP 2020 cannot just declare victory or half glass full on 2020 and say we are moving on. You have an unfinished, the world has an unfinished agenda. And whether it's ICFP or it's FP 2020, commitment countries, non-commitment countries that are working on family planning, I think there are two things. that I'd like to say we have to begin to work on. First, the unfinished agenda of reaching universal access to every woman, every girl, but the adolescents, the agenda of reaching both unmarried and married adolescents with not family planning, but access to high quality, not just contraception, but sex information, sexual health information. Third, the big and the most shameful unfinished agenda I believe we have is women deliver. They deliver babies, they deliver family planning, they suffer. Where are the men? Where are the men contributing? Women have the privilege of being able to give birth. You could have the privilege of practicing family planning and planning for your family where no woman has an unwanted pregnancy, where no child is unwanted. So our collective agenda continues, but I'm very proud of the achievements both in my country and the world, and this momentum FP 2020 has built. Nobody can deny, and let's give FP 2020 a big hand for that.
Thank you, Poonam. You're always a great motivator, and I think that men are here. The men in this room are the role models for men around the world, and we appreciate all that you've done, and we appreciate the opportunity to keep this momentum going forward to 2030. Before we leave the room, though, I want all of us to remember a few people. FP 2020 is a partnership that was built by all of us, and at the beginning, we had an executive director named Valerie DiFilippo. And we lost Valerie a few years into this partnership. We also really relied on the vision and the leadership of Dr. Babatunde Oshotamen. And so as all of us as people are in this room collectively spending the time of our lives, as Dr. Adan has said, in terms of putting yourself out there and making sure that your efforts are relevant every day, I want us to remember those who helped us to build all of this and who are no longer with us. And one of the things I've heard throughout this week is how exciting all of this is, but how tiring it is too. And so I want us to remember to take care of each other and to remember our own health as we're fighting for the health of others, and to take care of each other as a community. And in that note, I want to thank you all for helping us to build FP 2020, because it's your partnership. It's a partnership that's here to support the work that you're doing in countries, in international organizations, and in the most isolated areas of the world. So let's help each other to do this well. Let's take care of each other, and let's move toward 2030 knowing, as Mitchell said, that we might not get there at the time that we set, but we're going to get there, and we're going to go beyond it. So thank you all for being in this partnership with us. And thank you to the organizers of this incredible conference. And let's leave here today feeling the inspiration that Dr. Adan has given us, that we all matter and we can all make a difference. Thank you all.